All right, guys, a couple days late on doing this workshop today. We were going to do it 2 days ago on the 12th. Ended up having some different things come up in my schedule. So I pushed it back a couple days, so I do apologize for that. But we're here today and we're going to be talking about finding your true supporters as a musician, music maker, whatever you want to say. Um, some different ways to kind of identify, casual listeners from true supporters, real fans, people that actually invest in your stuff. And the article that we're going to be going over today is called Three Ways Casual Listeners Are Different from Real, or no, Three Ways Casual Listeners Are Different Than Fans. I thought it said real fans. But we're going to be going over that one from Reverb Nation. There's also a couple others that I'll leave you guys in the description of this video. And those ones are specifically for producers. There's a producer one by Vocal Article, which is called Building a Fan Base as a Music Producer. And then Disc Makers has one called How to Build a Fan Base Through Music Promotion, which is specifically talking about, selling vinyl, selling merchandise, CDs, whatever it might be. That's also a big thing too. But the one I want to focus on is more about, like I said, identifying what are the differences between people that are just hearing your stuff, maybe on Spotify, as kind of a passerby. They might hear you in a playlist via the algorithm, or just totally randomly. They might just hear a song of yours, but they don't just from that, they don't follow you on social media. They don't follow up from there. It's just kind of like a here and gone. And even if you come up a couple times, they're not going to be always looking for your stuff. So, what is the difference between that and someone that, finds your work and then ends up investing later on in your stuff? Becoming a real fan is someone that is going to keep coming back to every single release, or at least the majority of releases, and then eventually spending money to support you. It will go into a show, like you said, buying merchandise, things of that nature. So this one is by, her name is Rebecca, but her last name is not listed. This was written in 2018. But I think that everything in this still holds true. It's not really like there's anything that's outdated. It says playlists and streaming technology are upending just about everything in music, and the relationship between fans and musicians is no exception. A decade ago, it'd be safe to call most of the artist's listeners true fans, but that's no longer the case. Between the plummeting value of music and how easy it is for fans to listen and discover new music, more people are listening to more music than ever before. But it takes much more than listening to an artist to become a loyal fan. Here's three ways casual listeners are different than fans. And again, I think it's interesting that, this was written in 2018, and that's like the opening article is talking about streaming, specifically kind of devaluing music as opposed to the physical sales, because streaming kind of kicked off really when I started making music around 2016, 2015. That's when streaming started to take over like full time. And now, we're 9, 10 years later, and nothing's really changed. We're kind of still in the same boat with Spotify, Apple Music, that sort of thing. So I think it's kind of interesting that that still holds true, at least for now. Listeners sample, fans dig in. If your band, or you as an artist, racks up 10,000 listeners per month over major streaming platforms, those numbers don't necessarily translate to engaged fans. Casual listeners might check out your latest single or your most popular song, but it doesn't mean they'll buy your music. Make it to your shows or show interest in your less popular work. So that's exactly what I was talking about earlier with the algorithm of, let's say, Spotify, and Spotify's monthly listener charts, stats, whatever you want to call it. That's quite an interesting thing, and I still don't really know how it works, because I've kept tabs really more closely the last couple years on my stats as a music maker, and man, it fluctuates all over the place. Specifically, the last probably month or so, when I've been pushing my previous full album, and now I'm beginning the process of pushing the next album, putting out singles, and getting those pitched to editorials, but also doing a lot of playlisting on the back end through different producers, different people that would add my song to their playlists, and they're all organic playlists, of course, because you never want to go for the paid playlisting or the bot playlist, which obviously that's another discussion. We might be able to do a workshop on that soon as well, because I think that's been a big thing lately. But I say all that to say that my listenership has fluctuated a lot. Like one week I'll be hovering around 5,000, and then the next week I'm down to 3,000 within a few days. So I'm not really sure how that works, because sometimes it's weird because the numbers for each track will be up. They're going up. Let's say every day. Let's pick one track as an example. Every day this track is getting 20 to 30 listens, plays, whatever. So it's steadily increasing. The percentages are going up, but my overall monthly listenership will drop by like 1,000 people within 5 days. And these aren't things that I necessarily care that much about, because I think a lot of it is smoke and mirrors anyway. But I just find it very interesting and kind of fascinating how that works, specifically for Spotify, because I like Apple Music more for a lot of reasons, but I like that Apple Music doesn't throw the numbers down your throat. Like, you can get on Apple Music for artists and you can check out their your numbers and your stats, but they're not super into showing everyone else your stats, and it's just not a big thing. It's not as big of a deal over there. And I've done decent numbers on Apple Music too the last year or so, which has been pretty cool. But I don't know, it's just something to kind of think about, and you got to think about how many people might hear your song in a playlist, but they're not going to ever dive into your stuff because they're just there to listen to the playlist and kind of hear different artists, especially people that put on, in my case, a lot of the stuff I'm putting out is instrumental music. If somebody hears a playlist with a lot of beats in it, they might not even be looking at their phone. They might just put that on because they're trying to study, they're trying to clean the house, they're trying to do whatever else they're doing during the day. They might not even look at their phone to be like, oh, who is this? Unless it really catches their attention, it's probably not going to trigger them to say, hey, let me dive into this person's work. So it kind of just depends on like a case by case basis, but I think it's something to think about. And, like I said, since 2018, nothing's really changed that much. If anything, we've gotten more hyper focused on playlisting and, doing editorials, trying to get Spotify's attention, all of that stuff. So yeah, I like I said, it's fascinating in all the wrong ways to me, like how it works. And I try not to, watch it too much, because I think it is something that you can't always just every single day be looking at the numbers, because that'll do something to you. It'll really start to affect you in different ways. But I think as long as you're seeing pretty steady engagement over there, you're good. But I agree with this article where it says, that doesn't mean these people are your fans. It means they are just listening to your stuff. So being able to identify that is the most important thing. Fans are in it for the long haul. A surefire way to tell whether your listeners are fans or not is by separating the folks who stick around to support you over the years from the ones who listen to you for a short period and move on. True fans listen to all music let's try that again. True fans listen to all music and artist releases and have attention spans long enough to remember them throughout gaps between their releases. But before you go off resenting casual listeners of this, there's a few things you should consider. First, because of the massive amount of music that's now being released each day, listeners are now inundated. I think I got that right. Inundated with music. This is why so much music gets forgotten or overlooked, which is frustrating, but that's the way things are. Also, if you've got lots of devoted fans, spending too long putting out new music can be a career killer. That's not your listener's fault. So yeah, these are all things definitely to consider. A big thing I've always thought too, if you're really in this for the longevity of everything, you want to be around for years and years and years. A big thing to consider would be, you put out a body of work, you put a lot of work into that, you put a lot of time, money, effort into that. You want to see it do well immediately. And a lot of times it's not going to do super big numbers or get a lot of engagement right off the bat. I think the most important thing is that if you are staying consistent and you're promoting things and you're putting things out the way you're supposed to, you should, I don't know, I feel like you should not have the expectation that it's always going to hit immediately, but you should understand that as long as it exists out in the world, it will eventually catch the right people's attention. And the amount of artists that I'm a fan of now that I discovered way later on when they were already, 10, 15 years into their career is astounding, especially the last year or so. I've discovered a lot of different artists that I now listen to almost every day, but they've been doing it for years. It's not like I heard their debut album or their debut song and jumped right on board. But the reason I think I discovered those artists is because they're still going, they're consistent, and they put a lot of effort into every single thing they put out. And I think those are the artists that have the most longevity. Is you have to be able to have a little bit of everything: consistency, quality, and just an understanding that, one song or one album is not going to make or break everything you do. Just stay as on top of things as possible. And I think the best thing is when somebody hits me up and says, hey, this just happened to me the other day, actually. I was talking to a record store in Illinois that I sent a few copies of my album to, and the owner of the store, he was like, yeah, I found your work on Tidal. I'm checking out all the stuff. And he said in particular, he liked my EP called One West Coast Evening that I put out in 2021. I haven't even thought about that EP in probably 2 or 3 years. It was a really cool EP. I enjoyed putting that together. But he's like, yeah, I love this One West Coast Evening. He's like, this is awesome stuff. And I remember, when I made that, it was kind of an ode to California, where I, took my senior trip, got inspired to make music. The cover art is literally a picture from that trip. And I kind of had a flashback and I was like, yeah, I did put a lot of effort into that EP for sure, because it has skits talking about, Los Angeles, and it was kind of themed to the whole California mindset and California perspective. But like I said, I hadn't thought about it in a while, but I'm like, wow, it just goes to show, I've been kind of putting in work on my own stuff and, paying attention to detail. And, 4 or 5 years later, now this total stranger is hitting me up and saying, I like this body of work. This is a nice thing. And it's like, wow, that makes me want to keep going and keep doing good work on my future projects and really just continue to have attention to detail. But, if I was so caught up on that getting immediate attention, I probably wouldn't get that type of response. So I think that's a great example. But yeah, I think it's just something to kind of keep in mind because it is important for sure. Listeners don't engage. If you've got someone who shows up to your shows, interacts with you on social media, and buys your merch, then you've got a real fan. Listeners listen, but fans show their support in a myriad of ways. The kicker here is that some artists can appear to have a huge amount of traction and success over streaming platforms only to realize they don't have much in the way of loyal fans when they hit the road or release new music. This can affect a lot of people that they want to go on tour. Maybe they want to be an opener for someone, like a bigger act. The problem is, if you're trying to convince either, the promoters or the management of that bigger artist to let you go on tour, they got to actually see the proof that you're going to bring an audience and that you're going to keep an audience. Especially when people try to launch a solo tour, even if, let's say, they have been an opener for a year on someone's tour, it went pretty well. If things don't look great on paper, the sales aren't there, things like that, you're less likely to get your own headlining tour from there. You might have to start small, start locally, try to get into some venues in your area, and then just slowly start to expand it. I mean, you got to start somewhere, and I think everybody wants to just jump to being the biggest thing or the next big thing, and it's like, that's just not realistic when you're considering the amount of people that are trying to do what you're trying to do, trying to kind of set yourself apart too. And we've talked about, before we've talked about different ways to stand out, like promoting yourself and doing different marketing things. So that can kind of play into this too, I think, where you kind of you got to be able to set yourself apart in some type of way. But I definitely would say don't get discouraged about that sort of thing. And I by no means am an expert on, what it takes to get booked at things. I'm not a live performer, never done it before. But it's worth, researching. I just know that from knowing artists and kind of knowing, what they've gone through in the past as well, especially in recent years, and how kind of the landscape of live entertainment has changed. So that's just, something to consider as well, if you are like a live performer. But there's different ways to kind of get your foot in the door with that. But I think again, I agree with everything they said in that portion is, you'll be able to tell like who is going to keep showing up and who is just there for the moment. It will become more evident over time, because you'll see the same faces start to pop up every time you put things out. So that's huge. How to win over casual listeners. Figuring out how to convert regular listeners into devoted fans is something that's going to become more and more important for musicians in the future. The hardest and most obvious solution to winning over fans is by doing your best to regularly release great music over the long term. But that's only part of the answer. The identity musicians carve out for themselves through non-musical fronts serves as an important chance to catch an audience's attention and make a lasting impact. Videos, engagement, and visually compelling live shows are just a few ways for artists to help bring their music off of streaming platforms and into the world to earn fans. And that is the end of the article, but I want to touch on that as well. We always talk about, you hear everybody talk about social media, the importance of being on it to some extent. Not everybody's going to be into it. We've had these discussions before on these workshops. Use it to the best of your ability. Do you. Be yourself. Don't overdo it. And I think that's what this all comes back to at the end of the day is, even if you're trying to get a lot of fans quickly, just be aware that, don't sacrifice your integrity for anyone. Just stay on the path. Like just be yourself. That's really what all this stuff comes back to, because the right people will find you and stick with you because you are yourself. I think the biggest way to deter people away is to try to pretend to be someone else or try to put on some type of facade and, kind of put a mask on what you're doing just to make it seem like, oh, this will attract this type of person to become a fan, because you're going to regret that one way or another, you're going to regret that decision. So just continue to be yourself, be authentic, all that sort of thing. And that's how you're going to get the listeners to turn into fans, even if it takes a long time. And that's, again, that goes back to consistency, being in it for the right reasons, everything that I would preach to you a million times over and over again, even though I hate preaching to you people. But I will. That's a hill I will die on. Consistency, authenticity, all that sort of thing. That's what all this stuff really ties back to. But yeah, that's the article right there. And like I said, written by Rebecca. Don't know her last name, but this one is from the Reverb Nation blog. Definitely check that out. All three of these articles, like I said, will be in the description of the video. So I have a read on those. Like I said, one is for music producers. The other one is talking about promotion, specifically through merchandise, things like that. And all this stuff just kind of ties together. But yeah, like I said, I'm sorry that this took a couple days to get out. Been pretty hectic with the schedule lately. But we're going to try to do the next one on the 19th here in a few days on Tuesday. And the next one is going to be one that I actually had to reschedule from like the beginning of the year. We're going to be talking about creating your own album art. Big thing that a lot of people are starting to do, or maybe have already been doing. I've been doing it for a while actually. So I'll give you kind of my experience with creating my own album art, but also give you some tools, what can you use to do this? And maybe like, how can you find inspiration to create the right type of album art too? So maybe like a little bit of everything will be included in that. But I've been looking forward to doing that one for a while because I ended up having to push that back from the beginning of the year. But thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. I hope this one helps. And we will see you on the 19th. Really hope, don't have to push it back. But if I do, you'll know because you won't see it on the 19th. But until then, as always, stay safe, stay positive. We'll see you next time, guys.